It's difficult to have been a person living in the 70s and 80s and not have heard of the Mackay sister murders.
7-year-old Judith and 5-year-old Susan Mackay were taken while waiting for the bus to Aitkenvale School.
We're dealing with an 86-year-old suspect. He could no longer hide from these crimes.
Brisbane Homicide Squad detectives raided the man's house this morning.
It was like standing in front of your grandfather.
It's one of Queensland's most notorious crimes.
Is your husband innocent, Mrs. Brown?
Yes, he is.
He would have committed sex offences for 50 years. These kids knew what he was, a pedophile.
What Grandad wants, Grandad gets.
Was he a serial killer?
He said those little girls are just prick teasers.
Prick teasers? Who makes that comment?
He was just an evil, evil man. I just don't know how he got away with it for that long. God, it's just terrible.
My name is Brendan Rook. I'm a former Detective Sergeant of the Queensland Police. Over the years, the one thing that I have spent a lot of time doing is working on cold case homicides. And the Mackay sisters would be the very first I actually worked on in 1998. Susan was 5 years of age, Judith was 7 years of age, the youngest of 6 children of Bill and Thelma Mackay. They both attended the Aitkenvale Primary School. Every morning, their mother would watch them walk to the bus stop, which was some 200 metres away from home, and the children would catch the bus on the same road to the school, which wasn't far away. The father, Bill Mackay, had left early before the girls went to school, had kissed them goodbye, and that was actually the last that Bill would ever see of his 2 young girls. This sort of thing just doesn't happen in Townsville, that children just go missing. By dawn the next morning, the police had organised a search of the area. The coordinated effort pretty much had Townsville in a shutdown. There were literally thousands of people that participated. And the 2 days after the girls have gone missing, they were found. The first body to be located was that of Susan's. She had 2 stab wounds to the upper part of her chest. Judith's body was found an hour later, away from the road and further into the scrub, sort of potentially indicating that Judith may have been running away, and there was signs of struggle. She was located face down, naked, and her head was pushed into the sand. She too had also been stabbed twice, but the cause of her death was the sand in the lungs. Both girls had been raped. The father, Bill, was taken out to the scene, and the detectives had to restrain him from trying to view the bodies. Yeah, this is one of the crime scene photos. These are the girls' bags, school bags. This property was located very close to the body of Susan. As far as the crime scene was concerned, the investigators at the time had very little to go on. What they did find, which was strange at a scene like this, is the girls' clothes, uniforms, were neatly folded next to the bodies. I think it was very difficult for the investigators as well at the time that just the crime scene photos alone, it was a very emotional time for everybody. Obviously, it's a cold case for a reason. The case went cold, and by 1971, all inquiries have been exhausted. I'm very careful not to criticise the investigators in Townsville at the time. They were working through the night, through their holidays. There was one investigator that vowed not to go home until the killer was located, and in fact, a couple of weeks later, he had a heart attack and actually died at work. In our reinvestigation in 1998, we relied on local knowledge from a veteran Townsville detective, Ray Charles Smith, who'd been working in the city since the mid-60s, and local knowledge from that era was crucial to the investigation.
In those days, you didn't really care about locking your front door or leaving the keys in your car, or when they went missing there, like it seemed that half the town didn't go to work the next day, and that it was all on the radios and all that.
From the start, investigators were trying to find a particular type of car thought to have been involved in the abduction that had been mentioned by witnesses.
Well, everyone had their hopes pinned on a FJ Holden with a blue door, and that was the centre of attention.
But there was a problem when I took a look at the original statements. One thing that hit me straight away, all the statements were saying something like an FJ Holden. Taking yourself back in time, FJ Holdens were a fairly popular vehicle, and everyone knew what an FJ Holden looked like. So I didn't quite understand why most of the statements would read something like an FJ Holden. My view is you either know an FJ Holden or you don't, so that was probably the first red flag for me. To some witnesses, the car looked like an FJ Holden, possibly even an EH Holden, similar, but not definitely either of these models. Regrettably, the investigators and Ray superiors ran with the belief that the killer drove an FJ Holden. The investigators had rounded up every person in Townsville that had an FJ Holden with an off-driver's side blue door in Townsville. Every one of those people were interrogated and eventually identified as not being responsible. They never looked for any other blue cars other than Holdens. That was despite the fact that several witnesses had identified another vehicle, an imported British car called the Vauxhall Victor. Thank you, Jerry. So these three pictures, we have an FJ Holden, an EH Holden, and we have the Vauxhall Victor. We have two witnesses and later a third that said it was a Vauxhall Victor. The witnesses were very clear that they said it was a Vauxhall vehicle. It wasn't something like a Vauxhall. They were saying it was a Vauxhall. Unfortunately, the information about the Vauxhall was disregarded. They've chosen to follow a wrong path. Some witnesses' statements had been influenced by investigators into suggesting the vehicle was an FJ Holden. Investigators also thought the killer was already sitting in a jail cell. There was a Western Australian inmate who were to make admissions to killing the girls. The reason for that was he apparently was feared being killed in prison in Western Australia and wanted to do time in Queensland. He also had an FJ Holden, so he actually fitted in with the narrative. So he was flown to Townsville, where it quickly became clear he'd been lying all along. Unfortunately, I think the police have spent too much time on the vehicle and disregarded the description of the offender. I can't say that it would have changed the course of the investigation for them. However, I think maybe now they would have done things a little bit differently.
Seven-year-old Judith and 5-year-old Susan Mackay were taken from Ross River Road while waiting for the bus to Aitken Vale School.
In 1974, Cyclone Wanda hit Queensland and flooded Brisbane, destroying many of the police records in storage. Unfortunately, that included evidence in the Mackay sisters case. The crime scene photos survived. However, some evidence crucial to the investigation, in particular the girls' clothing and swabs taken from the bodies, were lost. Without all the evidence, we were struggling. So we needed a bit of luck, and we got it. A woman who'd been bottling up a long-held secret rang Crime Stoppers and asked to speak with someone regarding a murder in Queensland 30 years ago. She was referred to me and Detective Hickey.
I said to them, look, I think Arthur Brown has killed these two children. He had murdered the two little girls.
Arthur Stanley Brown, patriarch of Mim's family. We'd never heard of him before. His name didn't appear anywhere in the files from the 1970s. He'd never been spoken to, didn't appear on any running sheets, so the Townsville detectives weren't even aware of Arthur Stanley Brown. And this is the problem with the investigation in 1970, that Brown had not been charged with any offences. Brown was not a suspect at any stage.
They just said, we're coming up. I've never been so glad to see two people as I was to meet them.
Mim told us Brown was a maintenance man for the Queensland government, a carpenter who worked in official buildings, police stations, courthouses and schools, including Aitken Vale School, where the Mackay sisters went. And most importantly, Mim told us about a dark family secret. Mim provided information in relation to child sexual abuses and rapes committed on family members of Arthur Stanley Brown. We're not talking about child abusing, we're actually talking about full-on vaginal rape of young children. And he would commit a lot of these offences whilst Hester, his then wife, was in the house.
I was 12. I reckon I was about 12 when I first met him. My auntie Hester was Arthur Brown's first wife that I know of. They met when she was out west somewhere. Her husband was working on the railway and Mr. Brown got her to leave her husband. She had 3 children too, and he took the children and her. He never changed over the years. He always had that slab-sided face, not a whole lot of hair, big ears. Yeah, and that was just him.
Mim didn't live with Arthur and Hester Brown, but she knew exactly what happened in their house.
Thanks, mate. Louth Street, huh? The House of Horrors. That's what it is. In this house, he had a little shrine which had been one of the bedrooms. And the room was always locked.
Mim told us the door to this room had 2 locks, so it could be bolted from the inside. This is where we would later discover Arthur Brown often took his victims.
He had the girls sitting there drinking and playing strip-jack naked. So they were all in different parts of being naked. When the girls used to come over and stay, he went into the bathroom and bathed the girls. And they'd say, "Grandad, you know, I'm however age." No, you've got to be bathed properly. That's the sort of thing he used to do. And also, he molested his little step-granddaughters down the back of the house.
Brown abused girls in the family aged between 3 and 13, at least 6 young girls. Hester actually caught him raping one of the children.
There was one day, he had one of the girls, his pants were round his ankles, and he had one of the little girls doing oral sex on him in the kitchen. And Auntie Hester walked out. She was terrified of him. And Auntie Hester wasn't going to say anything because she couldn't get away anywhere. Couldn't get away from him. He was just an evil, evil man.
There was question about whether or not Arthur was responsible for Hester's death in 1978.
Auntie Hester, she was crippled with arthritis. When she died, he said that she'd fallen and killed herself.
The certificate of death had been issued over the phone by the doctor, who never saw the body. Arthur then took the body and had it cremated straight away. So, whilst we're not able to prove that Arthur was responsible for murdering his wife, we were certainly looking at that as a possibility because the sister Charlotte moved in very shortly after, who he was having an affair with. So Brown married Charlotte and she moved in, bringing her granddaughters into Brown's reach. The reality back in 1970 is that a lot of those crimes just went unreported, and a lot of those sexual offendings were actually swept under the carpet, even within their own family. It's not talked about.
I was sitting on the back steps and he just walked up behind me, and I thought he was just putting his hands on my shoulders, you know, but then he just moved in and cupped my breasts, and I just, oh, jeez. And I told my husband about it, that he said, oh, he wouldn't do that. You're imagining it. Mum and Dad just said, God, he wouldn't do that. He's a grandfather, for goodness sakes. Nobody wanted to know.
A few days after the murders, Arthur Brown made a disturbing suggestion.
I was staying at Brown's at the time of the murder, and he wanted to take Auntie Hester, my sister, and I out to Anthill Creek to show us where the girls were found. That was odd, very odd. I mean, who would want to do that? Over the time, it was just like he was feeding people little bits of information to see what they would do with it, you know, just to see if someone would say anything.
He'd tell the girls he abused that he could have murdered the Mackay sisters. By Brown saying that he could have killed those girls, I think personally he's also sending a clear message to them. If you talk about this, you could also be a victim. Thanks to Mim, we had hopes that the crimes that shocked the nation could finally be solved. We had strong new leads the original investigators didn't have. One of them was knowing what car Arthur Brown was driving back then.
The Vauxhall. I wonder how many people that he took and molested in that car. That's what he used to do with the girls. He'd take them out somewhere, and he always made the eldest girl sit in the front with him, and he'd say, what Grandad wants, Grandad gets.
Mim had told us that Arthur had a Vauxhall with an off-driver side blue door. Mim had told us that he'd taken the door off the vehicle and buried it in the backyard.
He said to his daughter-in-law, because she said to him, what are you taking your door off your car for, Grandad? He said, I don't want them coming around here accusing me.
Another thing that Mim talked about with Brown was that he was meticulous, particularly when he was folding clothing. He was a very tidy person, almost obsessive compulsive. One thing that we identified at the scene was the clothing of the children was actually very neatly folded next to the bodies. The socks were neatly folded inside the shoes, but a lot of the information she provided was starting to stack up. It was helping us develop a disturbing profile of a man we believe had been in the presence of investigating police.
The two little Mackay girls, they went to the Aikenvale State School, and Brown was there. He used to work there. I can remember when he came home one day and he said, those little girls are just prick teasers, you know. He said they're going to get some man in trouble one day. And I just thought they're primary school children.
What he termed as prick teasers. I mean, who makes that comment? That's not the comment of a normal person. During the reinvestigation in 1998, I went out to the crime scene to get a feel for the crime scene. The original road remained intact, but completely unused behind a padlocked gate. As luck would have it, that abandoned bit of road was exactly where the crime scene was. So essentially, that crime scene has been preserved for 27 years. We were able to go to the exact location of where the bodies were. It was like every hair on your body is standing to attention that you've just entered this preserved, incredibly preserved crime scene. It was an incredible experience, something I'd never been through up to that point, something I'll probably never experience again. The significance of this old crime scene is that Mim would tell us that a number of the step-grandchildren had been taken out to that same creek and they'd been abused sexually. So this is a location that's known to Brown, and we have 6 sightings of Arthur's car at this scene. We're now able to confirm that yes, you would be able to actually see the vehicle from this particular location. We were tracking down witnesses who still had good recollections of Brown. A man who in just weeks had gone from being a retired elderly carpenter, unknown to police, to our main suspect. 50% of our witnesses had already passed away. One thing we were fighting against was time. The witnesses were maybe in their 70s, maybe in their 80s, and their memory may start to fade. A witness with a good memory was an Army veteran called Neil Lunny, who was running late for work that day. The driver of the vehicle in front of him was cutting him off and wouldn't let him pass. So he pulled up along the vehicle, looked at the driver and saw the girls. He got a good look at the girls.
Neither of them were distressed, neither of them were upset, they weren't crying, they weren't yelling for help, or they obviously, in some form or other knew the person that was driving the car.
Luckily, after all this time, Neil Lunny still had a crystal clear recollection of the man behind the wheel. The driver of that vehicle had Mickey Mouse ears, and that description is fitting of Arthur Brown. He has what appears to be Mickey Mouse ears. 2 hours after Neil Lunny's sighting of the girls in the blue car, 90 kilometres away in the coastal town of Ayr, a blue car was spotted refuelling at a service station.
Now, the woman at the service station, she saw the man behind the wheel of a blue car with 2 little girls in the car who seemed quite upset.
And when she got off the seat and said, "Are we there yet?" the big girl turned to the driver and said, "You promised to take us to Mummy. When are you taking us to Mummy?"
She said the man behind the wheel was thin-faced. He had a lantern jaw, short hair, and his ears stuck out a bit. Quite a distinctive-looking head. This was by far the best clue, regardless of the actual make of the car. the investigators. They didn't put out identikits, they didn't put out artist impressions. The police of that era, I have to say, did not distinguish themselves. They jumped to conclusions. They played a hunch that bad man they're looking for was driving a Holden, and they ignored evidence that it might have been another sort of car. That buggered the whole investigation for close to 30 years. After a year or two of the murders, two young men both heard strange confessions from Arthur Brown that implicate him in these murders. The first one is a young fellow, 19 years old. He's got a job in Charters Towers. He's having a drink after work in a pub there, and in comes this thin, neat-looking older man. And this fellow sits down and rolls a smoke and starts talking. Arthur Brown brings up the subject of the murdered girls, and he said the police are looking for the wrong car. That young fella, on the ball, he went and saw a local policeman and said, guess what, I've been having a drink with this bloke, and he said that he was involved in the murder. 2 days later, he sees Arthur Brown in the same pub, and Brown's quite cocky. And he said, the police came and saw me about, the Mackay thing, but they'd nothing to do with me, no problem. And the police had been to see Arthur Brown and accepted whatever he told them at face value, and they did not go on with it. Arthur was a maintenance carpenter with the Queensland government. There was another young man, he had worked with Arthur Brown as assistant, and he used to talk to him and they'd eat lunch together. And at some point, Brown said, police have got it wrong, they're looking for the wrong car. And he said, I killed those girls, which shocked the young bloke, but he thought, it can't be right. But he never forgot it. He never forgot it.
So after conducting the cold case investigation, after talking to relatives, after talking to other new witnesses, a picture started to develop around Brown, and we believe Brown was responsible. However, in this case, there was no smoking gun. The cold case investigation had been running for months. That all the evidence we had against Arthur Brown was circumstantial. There's nothing in the information that Min provided that directly told us that Arthur was the killer, except for bits and pieces of information in relation to Arthur bragging about he could have killed those girls. We knew almost everything there was to know about Brown and what had occurred at Lau Street, Townsville, his pure evil activities, and the possibility he may have killed his first wife, Hester, to marry her sister, Charlotte.
Charlotte was a little tiny woman. Her relatives noticed that she used to wear young girls' pyjamas to bed, like shorty pyjamas, like a 10-year-old might wear. And she was a middle-aged woman. And they said, why do you, Auntie Charlotte, why do you wear those kids' pyjamas to bed? And Arthur jumped in and said, because she's my little girl. My little girl. Creepy old bastard.
Well, he was a carpenter and he used to go to schools, the prisons, any government buildings. He worked at the Aikenvale School and he said they all called him Uncle Art. And I thought, well, that sounds like it.
That was another piece of information that Min provided that made sense to us. That term is significant because Uncle suggests a familiarity, a trust. The fact that the driver was able to entice the girls into the car without dragging them. We're not talking about a snatch and grab abduction. Is suggestive that the girls know him. It corroborates how the girls may have been in that vehicle in the first place.
Because of the job he had, a unique job really, he kept his tools and his paint brushes and all the rest of it in an annex to the local courthouse in Townsville. He knew the JPs, he knew the local magistrate. He'd be fixing up their desk or the window or whatever it was. They all knew him. Hello, Brownie, g'day, boss. He knew the local police, same thing. He'd do maintenance at the police station. And he knew the police from the bottom to the top to the inspector. He had the run of the place. He was invisible because he was there all the time, because he was part of the furniture.
Oh, I didn't know him personally, but he used to work for the Public Works Department at the old police station in town there, and being old, it was always getting repaired. And he used to come there and, you know, just say, "G'day, how you going?"
But the children at the Cutharinga Children's Home, my sister was working there at the time, and he drove past, and the kids said, "Oh, look at that old rock spider."
"Oh, there goes that old rock spider, the rock spider." And she said, "What do you mean?" And they explained to her what a rock spider is, a pedophile. These kids knew what he was, and they knew all about rock spiders, and he must have done stuff there that alerted them to his proclivities, something that no one else had picked up. The kids had.
He was old now, as were the memories of our witnesses, which we knew would be an issue in court. When you're dealing with a 30-year, a cold case investigation, it's an easy thing to criticise memory. We believe now we've exhausted all inquiries, and we believe we have as good a brief as we're going to have against Arthur Stanley Brown. By the 3rd of December 1998, we were actually ready to move on executing a search warrant on Arthur Stanley Brown at his home address.
Brisbane Homicide Squad detectives raided the man's house in the Townsville suburb of Rosslea this morning. The Army was called in to search the yard and house.
We're dealing with an 86-year-old suspect. So when Arthur answered the door, it was almost like standing in front of your grandfather. He didn't seem surprised at all when we said we were investigating the Mackay sister murders and that we were from the homicide unit. And he just acknowledged and nodded and invited us in. We didn't blink an eyelid. It was almost like he's acknowledged that it's caught up with him.
And Charlotte said something like, "What's going on? You know, what have you done?" And he said, "Don't worry, love," he said, "I've done some awful things and now I've got to pay for it."
He did not want to talk to police at all about any of Mackay's sister-related matters. But when we asked what cars he'd owned, he quickly reeled off a long list. Except he missed one vehicle. He missed the Vauxhall Victor. And it wasn't until his wife, Charlotte, corrected him and said, "Well, hold on, you had the Vauxhall Victor." And he says, "Oh, right." Brown completely avoided talking to us about that vehicle. We went looking for the secret room where Brown took his victims. That room still existed with a lock on the outside and the inside of the door, as the girls had said. What was in the room at that particular time was Vaseline, was pictures of the grandchildren, everything consistent with the stories of those girls being raped and sexually abused. But as we were leaving, we said, "Well, Arthur, obviously you're under arrest and you're coming with us." And Charlotte asked his wife, she said, "Will you be coming home?" And he said, "I don't think so."
After all this time, an 86-year-old Townsville man has been charged with their murders. The former school worker will celebrate his 87th birthday on Thursday, defending the charges.
Arthur Brown was charged with 2 counts of murder and 43 child sex charges. We knew we had a strong case, albeit circumstantial, but ultimately it was up to a jury to convict him.
The Mackay family have waited almost 30 years to find out what happened to the 2 schoolgirls. It's expected that by the end of the week, they'll at least know whether the accused will stand trial for the girls' murder.
It was determined too prejudicial to run in the trial. So by the time we got to the Supreme Court, the jury are looking at an absolute clean skin of a person being accused of murdering 2 children. Nobody knew that Arthur Stanley Brown was a child abuser capable of rape. So the trial for Arthur Stanley Brown occurred on the 18th of October 1999.
Is your husband innocent, Mrs. Brown?
Yes, he is.
So you clearly believe your husband is innocent?
Yes, I do.
Are you confident the jury will find that way?
Shut up.
We're left with half of the witnesses from the investigation. We're really against the clock at this point in time. So what the defence had to play with was discrediting our investigation, discrediting the memory of our witnesses. Justice hadn't been served according to them because the killer had never been found. The witnesses were all very staunch. The memories of those occurrences for each one of the witnesses had remained with them quite strongly because it was a traumatic event. They live with the fact that they were the last person potentially to see the Mackay sisters alive.
You sit back later and you criticise yourself and say, you know, how come I didn't help them girls? And for me, over the years it becomes very hard because
there was a lot of confrontation during the course of this trial by the defence and the witnesses. And at one stage, one of our witnesses, Neil Lunny, ended up standing up, screaming at the defence lawyer. And the defence lawyer screaming back, this is how it all started. He accused myself and Dave of fabricating evidence. During the trial, Brown did not take the stand.
And what we saw in court was this old man, he was making a bit of a show of not following the proceeding. Oh, what, you know, what's going on? And
during the trial, we sort of got the feeling that the jury were actually taking all the information in and they were connecting the dots themselves.
Are you deaf?
You wouldn't like to say anything before you go
No,
today?
he wouldn't.
So we were quite confident that Brown was going to be convicted of the murder of the girls. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We had a hung jury. There was only one person in the jury that was reluctant to find Brown guilty, and the information we were told was that this person believed that Arthur looked too much like his grandfather.
We're shattered. We're shattered. We find it hard to believe.
They would have been devastated. You lose 2 kids. Oh, it broke my heart. It just broke my heart. I suppose they're past now, the Mackays. But yeah. Oh.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the Mackay family, Mr. Brown? Mrs. Brown, is there anything you'd like to say to the Mackay family? Has this made it harder or easier for you, Mr. Brown? Are you sure there's nothing you'd like to tell us?
Get lost, no.
I'm sorry, what was that, Mrs. Brown?
Absolutely.
The defence played an effective stay-out-of-jail card for Brown. They claimed he was suffering from dementia.
Not well enough to talk to you, thank you.
The Queensland Director of Public Prosecutions eventually agreed. It wasn't in the public interest to put Brown through another trial.
It's my view that he played the game, that he realised that dementia would be his friend and might prevent him standing trial, and that he cultivated perhaps the vaguenesses that you get in your 80s.
That was BS. He didn't have Alzheimer's. He was still switched on.
Unfortunately for us, that's the system. Arthur died a year later. Arthur wasn't convicted of anything. Arthur died a free man.
He was a terrible person. I just don't know how he got away with it for that long. Oh, God. It's just terrible.
It was a bitter pill to swallow for the Mackays, for all of the victims of Arthur, or the family who had managed to tell their story. Something Bill said, it's not about vengeance, it's about justice. And unfortunately, we just didn't quite get to that level of justice. One thing the trial did determine, and one thing that we are convinced of, is that Arthur Stanley Brown is responsible for the murders of the Mackay sisters. Arthur Stanley Brown is responsible for heinous acts of rape and sexual abuse against his own family. We had our man. Arthur Stanley Brown was our killer. But other questions remained. Had Arthur Brown murdered other children? Was he a serial killer?
This is the great mystery of Arthur Brown. Is he the best suspect for one of the biggest unsolved disappearances in Australian history? Adelaide, city of churches, city of bizarre crimes.
There's the first match coming up. It's going to be fed by
There's a football game at the Adelaide Oval. Two girls, one older one, Joanne Ratcliffe, and one little one, Kirsty Gordon. Joanne was taking little Kirsty to the lavatory at 3/4 time during this big game. They disappear.
The disappearance of 11-year-old Joanne Ratcliffe and 4-year-old Kirsty Gordon shocked Australia.
Various people saw something. There was a woman, Sue Laurie. In 1973, she was 14, and she saw a middle-aged man, thin-faced man, high cheekbones, broad-brimmed hat, and she assumed it was a grandfather with a recalcitrant grandchild, because he's carrying one little girl who's struggling and he's gripping her.
And the other little one was running along beside him, punching him and saying, "Put her down, put her down."
On the back, hitting him and saying, "Let her go, let her go." everything about the person she saw tallies with Arthur Brown. Arthur used to travel interstate for his holidays. And somebody remembered that he said to them that he'd seen the Festival Theatre almost finished when he'd been in Adelaide. This tallies perfectly with the timing of the disappearance of Joanne and Kirsty, who have never been found. Sex killers are driven by a compulsion. Some of them are very neat and tidy, sort of psychopathically tidy and careful. Arthur Brown was one of those. He didn't just come out of the blue as a middle-aged man and start offending. He built up to murder as a way to probably the ultimate thriller. And that once he got the taste for it, that he would have continued to do it. So he would have committed sex offences for probably 50 years. He was born in 1912. So he was in his 20s during the Great Depression, pre-World War II. So he could have been offending from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right up until he was too feeble to do anything. There were other cases in northern Queensland which do roughly fit the Arthur Brown mould. The case of Marilyn Wallman, March 1972, which is less than 2 years after the Mackay sisters. She gets on a bike and rides through cane fields towards school. Her brother's coming along within minutes. He finds her bike with the wheel still spinning, and she's gone. Clearly abducted.
Arthur had extended family out in Mackay. We know he was in the area of Omeo around about this time. In fact, the last known vehicle sighting near when Marilyn went missing was a Vauxhall, described as a blue Vauxhall.
It's a possibility. When that was investigated, nobody heard of Arthur Steely Brown.
Marilyn Wallman's body was never found. And at the time I thought that her murder was certainly one Brown could have been responsible for.
Brendan Rook and Dave Hickey and their team, they were just absolutely marvellous. If you gave them a bit of info, they were onto it like a seagull onto a sick prawn. They were fierce. They were just like bull terriers. They did a magic job, and the good thing about it was they still had time to talk to us. When you start getting a bit nervy about stuff, they were just brilliant.
Whilst we didn't get a conviction, the parents of Judith and Susan Mackay got the opportunity to look their daughter's killer in the eye. And I think that's important. We're not looking at anyone else in connection with these murders. This case is closed.